Debating Metalheads. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Debating Metal. I'm your host, Kenneth Dean, the Dean of Metal, and as always, my co-host is Chris K. On this episode of Debating Metal, we're going to have ourselves a little bit of fun. This week, we're going to talk about heavy metal mascots.
When you think of an organization, be it sports, somewhere you shop, or music, it wouldn't be uncommon for your first thought to be their mascot. They come in all shapes and sizes, as well as levels of aggression. Some have heavy meaning, while others just look mean. Not every band needs one, but those that do have one often define themselves by their fictional representative.
There's not going to be a big four today, as the whole episode is going to be one giant big four. So sit back, relax, turn it up to 11, and let the debate begin. However, before we begin the debate, I've got a little bit of housekeeping to do. On the previous episode, I made a couple of references and a couple of remarks that may or may not be taken out of context. Who knows? But we were talking about Queensryche, and we were talking about the Rage for Order album, which came out in 1986. And I talked about the album Empire, and I believe we started talking about the album or the song or something like that. And what ended up happening is when I was listening back to it, it sounded like I was implying that Empire was on Rage for Order. And that was not my implication, and that's not what I meant to say in terms of how it may or may not have come across.
Yeah, I doubt, knowing that, how big of a fan of Queensryche you are, and if you've been a heavy listener to the show, you probably know that was not the case, but I get it.
So I don't want to get, our new listeners to think that I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. I would hate to get a review where someone says, this guy doesn't know what the hell he's talking about.
Just the old listeners that think that.
Exactly. I only want the people who have been here forever to realize he doesn't know what he's talking about, but we like listening. All right. And then we were talking about Candlemass. So, I was on the episode, I'm listening to this thing, and I'm like, I've never heard Candlemass before. And, because you and I don't talk much about the episode, or Candlemass, or just the episode coming up in general, you told me about that you were going to talk about Candlemass shortly before the program began, or we started recording.
I think minutes before.
Yeah, it's like 40 minutes before, and I'm in the middle of dinner at this time. So I was like, okay, I never took this time to even listen to a song. So anyway, the next morning after we recorded the episode, I said, you know what? I should go ahead and listen to this. And I must say, while doom metal is not my cup of tea, I was surprised by pretty much how well the album sounded. It was well produced for its time, for its budget, because it probably had zero budget back in 1986, out in the middle of Sweden, right? So well produced. So I listened to pretty much the whole album, and for what it's worth, like I said, not my cup of tea, but there were a couple of really good songs that I thought were outstanding songs. One of them was A Sorcerer's Pledge, and the other one was Blackstone Wielder. So, someone could sit there and say, "Hey, Kenneth, what about this song and what about that song?" I'm sorry, it stops right here because I listened to the album and that's as far as I got. But those two songs did stand out to me. And like I said, it wasn't bad. I mean, listening to a little bit to what to me sounded like, a Sabbath kind of album, some of the slower Sabbath songs, but there was points in time where the rhythm picked up, and that's where I thought it was more enjoyable for me. So that's my housekeeping. I didn't want anybody to think that I was completely ignorant or anything like that, or didn't want to listen to stuff. So I listened to some Candlemass, and I'm correcting a verbal error on Queensryche. So we are here to talk about heavy metal mascots today. Chris, what are your thoughts on some of these mascots that adorn some of our favorite metal albums?
I mean, to some degree, I remember as a kid seeing certain characters on the covers of albums, and that being maybe a starting point for the band for me. You know, the idea of a mascot that appears on not just one but multiple albums. It's got a lot of features to it that I think draw people in, right? You want to see, like, you recognize that character, you know him from one album, you know him from the other albums that the band puts out. So like you can pick up an Iron Maiden album and you'll know it's Iron Maiden because it's got Eddie on every cover. Um, and I think that's one of the cool features that's there. There's a little bit of lore to the band. There's a little bit of lore to the character, to all these characters, right? So you instantly recognize. It's like you go to a sports game of any type, right? They have a mascot. So, like, say you have the Cardinals, you see a cardinal on that, and you know it's a cardinal. You know, I remember being a kid watching the Colts, football team, and just falling in love with the symbol, thinking it was super cool. So iconography, I think, is important to a lot of people. It's recognizable. It draws you in. It makes you feel like part of something too. Like, I mean, having Iron Maiden shirts with Eddie on them, or I mean, I had shirts with other characters we're going to talk about. Like, I think those were things that you gravitate towards, and it becomes part of being a fan of that band.
Oh, I totally agree with all that. You know, it's so it's one thing where these bands, they have the iconic logo of the band name. You
Hmm.
know, I mean, there's some out there that are just absolutely iconic. Kiss to me is the one that stands out probably the most because of they used it so prevalently in their stage show as well as their album covers. And
And they've really never changed it.
no, it just never changed. It's, and now what's weird is, on stage and, in their shows, the logo varied depending on what they were trying to do with it.
Hmm.
Um, and so like, I believe it was during the was it Hot in the Shade or the album that came out before Hot in the Shade. Those albums, they, the tours, the Kiss logo, the S specifically, was not the same as the album.
Hmm.
It was only really until recently when they moved to LED screens that they were able to actually 100% replicate the album or the logo, because I don't know if anyone knows this, but the two S's are different. They have the top portion of the S has a different angle than the other one next to it. So they're not perfectly symmetrical and they're not perfectly identical. So, the lights that they used to put behind them, you can only do, straight lines for the most part. So they would curve the metal to where they housed the light bulb behind it. But they couldn't replicate 100%. So someone pointed this out somewhere on the internet that now, because of the LED screens, they can actually use an exact replica. But it wasn't until literally this past probably 10 years, less than that, that they've been able to replicate their logo. But no matter what, it was still, you knew it was Kiss.
Yeah, I'm looking at the official logo, and it is slightly different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like one. I mean, it's a few degrees off
Yeah,
difference, but it
I
is.
noticed it when I was a kid, and I'm like, that's not like perfect, but whatever. So talking about Kiss to me is like the most iconic of band logos.
Hmm.
Yes, Metallica is my favorite. Metallica have had uh four different logos in their career. The first and the most recent being very, very similar, but there are slight differences. Um, and then there was the load and reload era logo was just terrible. And then They tried to become metallic all over again, and then the Saint Anger logo, while cool, it wasn't the same. So they eventually moved back to something very similar. They updated the original logo. Iron Maiden, great logo, but what sets a lot of these bands apart, or some of them, not all of them, but is bands like Iron Maiden and bands like Disturbed. They have a character that adorns their album covers that they have named, and in some cases, like with Iron Maiden, they bring them on stage. It's on every album cover. You know, uh, you know, uh, Disturbed has them on every album cover. So we're going to talk about some of these characters and their names, and where they, if we have the history of them, we'll talk about that. And we're going to basically give you guys our big four of each that we like. And we're also along the way going to talk about some of the others. Some good, some bad. So for me, my number four, big four, heavy metal mascot, my number four is Snaggletooth, Motorhead's iconic mascot that has adorned pretty much every single album cover of theirs in one way, shape, or another. Whether it's been one-dimensional flat, three-dimensional, with a train behind it, or three-dimensional just looking at it and you can see the shadows and shapes and stuff like that. It's been pretty much on every cover, and it's slightly altered from through the years, and then has come back to its original look and stuff like that. I think that Snaggletooth, pretty cool name. It's not like an uncommon name, but it's one of those things that set Motorhead apart. And you see the shirt, and it's Motorhead.
So there was a kid in my high school that's nickname was Snaggletooth. It wasn't a very nice thing, but I just kind of was remembering it. So I was asking you the other day about, or just mentioning it really, on the Funko Pop for the Snaggletooth character. It's identified as Warpig. And I think that's because there is a copyright on Snaggletooth by Hasbro for the Star Wars character Snaggletooth.
Oh, that's right. And I swear I knew I had read somewhere or had seen that name before. And now that you mentioned Star Wars, it's like duh,
Yeah.
but
So they can't have two
you can't
Snaggle.
have two snaggletooth people. um so Warpig, I guess that just for the sake of branding on a public item, they had to change his name to Warpig.
That's what it seems like, yeah.
But then why didn't Black Sabbath sue? Hey, we wrote a song about that.
That's plural war pigs.
Oh, well, let's just put two.
This is just one.
Put two boxes next to each other. You have pigs.
Now you got a Black Sabbath set.
I mean I dig the Motorhead thing, and it's funny because I've been dying to have a Motorhead shirt. I don't have a Motorhead shirt in my collection. Mind you, I started collecting. It's weird to say it this way. I just started collecting concert shirts recently. I used to have a shit ton of concert shirts when I was younger, and then I went through that I'm broker than broke period of my life, and then I just got away from wearing band shirts. But my wife and I now, we kind of talked about it. I'm like, is it okay if I just dress the way I want to dress, which is just jeans and a t-shirt? She's like, yeah, go ahead. And so lo and behold, I wear concert shirts almost all the time now. I'm like Eddie Trunk and the guys from That Metal Show. So Snaggletooth, I like him. That's my number 4. What do you got for number 4?
So I did not have Snaggletooth on my list, but I do really like that character. It just didn't stand out as much to me as the 4 that I have on my list, and maybe that's just like a nostalgia factor. But my number 4 is actually Facebones from Death Clock. I am a huge fan of Deathclock and Metalocalypse. I got into the show because I was a big fan of Brendan Small when he was doing a show called Home Movies. When that show got canceled, I was really sad because it was one of my favorite animation television shows of all time. And then I saw an announcement that he was working on a show with Tommy Blacha, and they were basically doing a metal animated show. And it was about a band, and that's all our metal band, and that's really all I needed to know. I was on board from the very beginning. I have all of their albums. I have I have been to their live shows, and Facebones is a big part of that because if you've ever watched the show, he's kind of like their mascot as well as a disclaimer for anything. Like, so if they're at a concert before anything plays, they have Facebones playing in the background on like a screen, oftentimes warning the crowd that they could possibly die from, the extremity of the show. Like at one point they're supposed to drop a big helicopter, like this giant helicopter supposed to drop like a box down on in like a target in the middle of the concert, and it totally misses and like crushes half the audience. And because it's metal, they're just like, ah, like Slayer, So it was just like he, to me, being such a big part of the show was very iconic. And I remember being at the show live, and it starts with Facebones doing the presentation, like the same exact thing that you would see on the cartoon. And I just thought that was like the coolest thing ever. Just it felt like you were at the fictional Death Clock concert in that way. I had a T-shirt with Facebones on it, and I just for me it was like one of those things like you felt like part of the show even more because it blurred the lines between the fiction and the reality. Very cool.
That's cool. That's cool. I knew nothing and probably still don't know anything of Death Clock or Facebones. I've seen the picture, and that's about it. Um,
Yeah.
I was never into um like all those kind of TV shows that had, like I don't want to say like animation. Like I was into The Simpsons, but I never got into, King of the Hill or American Dad or anything like that afterward. I mean, there was a certain period of time where I stopped. I was not into The Simpsons anymore. I
Yeah, I
watched
mean
South Park for a couple of years, and that was about it.
that was really more my generation where like Adult Swim came around, and that was like early 2000s. I was middle school, high school. So it was like my generation had like Aqua Teen Hunger Force and C Lab and Death Clock or Metalocalypse and shows like that were in the early days of those things. And it was a big cultural thing. Like my age group was really into that stuff, and I remember just hearing people talk about it all the time up until college. And I can see how like before that generation really would have missed that, and then maybe after it's kind of drifted towards a different scene as far as like what would be considered like adult cartoons like Rick and Morty and stuff like that. So but Metalocalypse recently came back for a finale movie after I think it was just about 10 years. So the story just kind of ended on a cliffhanger, and they finally ended it, and Facebones was in it. So yeah, like I know it's tough now to kind of get behind and go and watch that kind of stuff, but like you know even James Hetfield has an appearance on Metalocalypse. So
Yeah,
uh
I've read that somewhere a long
yeah, I
time
think
ago.
I think if you're a metal fan and you have the time, which is always tough, give it a chance, and you should probably find something to laugh at.
Oh, I'm sure. So, you're talking about Facebones, and I'm looking at some other characters here, like, because Facebones is basically a clown sort of looking character. clownish,
Mhm.
right? So I'm looking at some of these other characters that that are not part of my top four and or my big four, and the one that really stands out as really goofy looking to me is um, Ziltoid the Omniscient from the Devin Townsend project. And I'm like, first of all, he looks like Devin Townsend, which is weird, but it's really goofy looking. And it's some, I don't know, it's a cross between Devin Townsend and the creature from the Black Lagoon. So, um, some of these mascots can be really interesting, like the Mad Butcher from Destruction. It's like he's a butcher. It's just a
But he's mad.
character. Yeah, he's mad. Someone should, give him someone should tickle him or something, It's like I mean, he was used.
Ziltoid the Omniscient, sorry, like to interrupt, but
Uh-huh.
Ziltoid the Omniscient looks like a Muppet, like that's
Yeah.
very evil.
Yeah, I think that was he was trying to go for, but I don't know, it came out weird.
Probably, yeah.
And so look, the Mad Destruction used the Mad Butcher on several different uh incarnations. It's just
He
it's
just
just
looks like a
it's
New
just
Yorker.
it looks like an old like 1950s butcher, you know. And were you trying to say I look like the butcher?
No.
Man, insulted I am. But it's just to me the butcher's just kind of weird. Um and we'll talk about a few more along the way. Um so getting to my number 3 big 4 heavy metal mascot, I'm going to go with Charlie from Overkill. Now, I talked to you about this when we were talking about the mascots, but you have to say Charlie because in reality, I believe his name is supposed to be Charlie if you don't have a really thick New York accent. So if you have a thick New York accent, you say Charlie, and that's why his name is Charlie. That's just my guess. They're from New Jersey, so maybe I'm totally off. But I the Overkill, so Charlie from Overkill has adorned almost every single one of their albums. And I say almost because I'm pretty sure like From the Underground does not have Charlie on it. Um and the EP didn't have Charlie on it, but that's just a black cover. Um that's to me in metal one of the most iconic symbols that you can that a band has. I mean, he's on everything and the laser eyes, and then as time progressed and the albums, when we got into the 2000s or the 2010s, even all these recent albums since like 2008 and on, they Charlie's become more of a almost like a real figure. The artwork has gotten so refined and detailed and more lifelike in that sense. I dig it. I've been an Overkill fan for such a long time. So that's my
Yeah.
number 3.
Yeah, when I was looking over all these mascots, I mentioned this to you earlier. I never realized that the Avenged Sevenfold Death Bat was basically like a lamer version of Charlie.
And when you say lamer, it's lamer for
It is,
sure.
yeah. But yeah, I always thought it was cool. I remember seeing it on album covers, pretty early on. I've mentioned before, I wasn't really super into Overkill, but I've really gained a lot of appreciation for their music, especially like a lot of the newer stuff I'm a big fan of. So it was always really cool looking. I mean, I'm a graphic artist myself, and these kind of things were what really pulled me into metal, seeing these characters and stuff like that. So yeah, I would say definitely very cool.
I mean, you look at the new album that they have, or not the new album, but the single for Scorched. It's just the two Charlies looking at each other. It's pretty cool. Man, it's one of those things where it's so symbolic of heavy metal, and it's just like, you're getting, you listen, if you see that cover and you take off Overkill, you kind of know it's going to be some sort of metal. You're not expecting, you know, some pop R&B artist.
Yeah, I mean it's either metal or it's a cover of like Doom. Yeah.
True. Right. So, what's your number 3?
My number three is the Jester Head from In Flames. I was really into In Flames through the beginning of their careers, through all the way through. I said through like 8 times in the sentence, but um, up until uh, Clayman. And even after that, there were some albums I still listened to, and I still got into. But that kind of era of time, which was roughly 10 years, a little bit less, I was super into In Flames. I went to see them. I had a Jester Head shirt. I even at one time considered getting a Jester Head tattoo, and this is why I've really also never gotten a tattoo, because every time I think I want to get one, I think, man, I wouldn't want that on my body forever. Um, Maybe I'll come around someday, but so far I haven't found anything that I just want to see for the rest of my life. Um, Hence I'm divorced. So but yeah, the Jester Head I always thought was super cool. I remember drawing it on my books when I was in high school and stuff like that. Like I said, I had shirts of it. It was on most of the merchandise, if not like every album cover in some capacity. Like even if it wasn't directly on the front of the album cover, when you open the booklet, it was in there somewhere. It's been there since. It's on the newest album. So it is part of their iconography. It's been on everything since the second album, which is um really around the time that I got into them. Just a Race was somewhere in that span of time, right around there was where I started getting into the band. And that the Jester Race had it like prominently on the cover. And then I had the Blackish Inheritance EP, and that one did not have a cover, but when you took the CD out, it was on the back behind it. And it was just like, you know, again, what I mentioned earlier, when you have a mascot like that in a symbol, it feels like part of being part of a team. And when you went to a show, like I walked in with an In Flames shirt, I bought another one there, and I just remember like every shirt in there had a Jester Head on it in some capacity. Like it didn't matter what shirt it was. It was just like that was, you were part of the team, you were part of the band. And I just remember the feeling of that and the kind of excitement behind it, and that's kind of what drew me towards it.
I think that I like the Jester Head character. I like the uh, symbolism is a bad word. The design of it.
Yeah,
That
it's a cool design, a cool look.
it's a cool design, a very cool look. There's so much you can do with it in terms of artwork, and the most recent album that they released with Foregone has a really cool version of it on the cover, and I think that's pretty neat.
Hmm.
Considering, like the one before it was like a weird, like little demon kid kind of thing almost, from the I the Mask album. But it's still, you could tell it had the shape of the
Yeah, he
head.
was wearing the Jester Head.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think it's pretty cool. I like those kinds of things where it's so it's so synonymous with the band. As soon as you see a symbol
Hmm.
that like Jesterhead or like Charlie or like Snaggletooth, you instantly think of that band. You instantly think of one of your favorite songs from that band, and I think that's super cool. That's one of the really cool things about these mascots that these bands have. All right, time for number 2. for me, my number 2, I'm going to go with Vic Rattlehead from Megadeth. Now, you're a big Megadeth fan. I have been a Megadeth fan since Peace Sells. Um, although, Dave has a tendency to drive me insane, it still doesn't take away from the music. So, um, Vic Rattlehead has been persistent on Megadeth albums, since the beginning. Since the album that came out that was nothing of what Dave's original vision was, that is that first album that first album cover for Killing Is My Business is so. It's not. You can't say it's bad because it's not like Aerosmith
It's
bad.
just cheesy.
It's cheesy. Um, and now that with the modernization that he's done with the album, and then modernizing it again, each time has come out with a different version of his concept. Um, it's I mean the latest, the last one is pretty cool because there's a sense of realism to it, but at the same time it's artwork.
It's
Um,
the best one for sure. It
right.
really is. It's the
And
best
then
version.
then Peace Cells comes out, and you have this iconic, you know, Rattlehead, Vic, you know, selling real estate on the cover, and it's super cool, And ever since then, I mean, well, now I think about it, Vic did not adorn Countdown to Extinction.
No, the last one was Rust in Peace, and then he reappeared on The World Needs a Hero. So there were several albums in between where he was not, there, and that was kind of representative of that time period. Like in the '90s, everybody kind of went away from their mascots and then came back. There's a few bands that did not that maintained that for their entire existence. But yeah, like it's kind of consistent in the '90s where bands kind of like went away from those things.
Yeah, I mean, there was that simplicity thing, and
Mm-hmm.
it was bad to be known as a metal band, in the
Yeah.
in the 90s, and that's why, you know, Metallica couldn't really run from themselves, could they? When you have metal in your name, it's hard to run away from it. Um,
Yeah, I mean, they could have called themselves like Licka or
or not. uh,
Rock Licka.
yeah, that's what they should. Altalica. But yeah, so I agree. Now that I think about it, yeah, a lot of the logos kind of got tamed, or a lot of the mascots got tamed in the 90s, um,
hmm
because it was bad juju, if you want to look at it like that, you
Yeah.
know. But yeah, because for like going back to Charlie Overkill, they just used it almost in going into the 90s as a symbol. He wasn't the three-dimensional thing. It was almost like a stamp, you
Yeah, it
know?
just became like a logo essentially.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And
No longer a character, blasting laser beams at somebody. It was just
right.
a
And
symbol.
then, like I said, I mentioned when I talked about From the Underground, or From the Underground and Below, didn't have anything on it other than crosses. But it picked up again on Necroshine, and from there it's been just crazy.
hmm
I love Immortalis. I think that's a great one. But anyway, we're talking about Megadeth, and Megadeth's yeah, like you said, it picked up again on World Needs a Hero. But even that, it's weird. It's Vic, but it's just a skeleton. No body, no nothing, no pants, just the skeleton and the things screwed to its skull. The
Yeah, but that's
but
that's kind of what identifies Vic Rattlehead. I mean, he's a symbol of see no evil, speak no evil, hear no evil. I think that's how
right,
it goes, right? And so you see that like he's got the bolted thing over his eyes. His mouth is wired shut with the rings. and then he's got like the chains that are bolted on that are covering his ears. And it's that's one of those ones that has a little bit deeper meaning than just looking kind of cool. Because I mean,
Right.
if you listen to a lot of Megadeth, there is social commentary in what he plays. It's always been that way. No, it does. It's not enough to beat you over the head with it, but like listen to Peace Sells, but who's buying? Like, I think that's a song that if you listen to the lyrics, I think most people can kind of relate to.
Yeah, no, of course. Now I'm looking at Endgame. Endgame did not contain Vic on the cover.
It
Um,
Endgame, yeah. If you look, it's a bunch of like people walking, and they're like Vicks.
yeah, they look like they're Vic's. Yeah, they're just
Mhm.
not. You can't see the face.
Yeah, you don't see the face. Yep.
Although it's pretty wild. It's a bunch of, what was that, flies on the outside or bees? They look like flies. Yeah, not my thing. um,
It's
but
been a while since I've seen it, but
oh yeah, 13 has Vic facing away from the cover.
Mhm.
Super Collider didn't have it on there either. So he's gone
Super
up and
Collider.
down. Super Collider was just uh, and that was a weird album. Let me tell you that.
Yeah, we
It's
used
one,
to
it's
call
one of
it
those.
Pooper Collider.
Yeah, it's one of those albums where you just don't know what he wanted to do. But the last two, Dystopia and the Sick, the Dying, and the Dead, have Vic has come back in a very prominent role. I the albums, when you see Vic, you think of Megadeth, and that's one cool. Like when we went to see Megadeth and Lamb of God a couple years back, I bought a Megadeth shirt. Which, by the way, I'm going to say this is probably my favorite concert shirt because of how well it fits, not because of what's on it, but because
Mm,
of how well it fits. I love wearing that shirt because it fits so well. It's just something. It's got a different type of cut than other typical t-shirts. So it's more
yeah,
almost more athletic kind of. It's strange
a
that
little
way.
bit. Yeah, the one I have, I like the like consistency of it too. It's a nice shirt.
Yeah, no, it's a very nice shirt. So Vic Rattlehead, um the Funko Pop was pretty cool. So he's now into the
Two of them now.
mainstream. Is it two that they have
There's two.
now?
Yeah, there's one for Peace Cells now.
Oh,
It's
okay.
one of those bigger ones. Yeah.
Cool. Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, that's cool. Haven't gotten that one yet. I've slowed down on the Funko Pops because I have no place to put them right now. I'm still in the midst of trying to build my office here. All right. So what's your number two?
My number two is Vic Rattlehead.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah.
Cool.
For all the reasons that we just spoke about, and for me, Peace Cells and Rust in Peace are two of the most iconic. Like if I think of like if you ask me what the most iconic album covers in metal were, like, and I had to really think about it, two of them that would pop up in my mind would be those two albums. I've always loved the cover for Peace Cells. I've always loved the cover for Rust in Peace. And Vic is a big part of that. Like, you see that character, it's a Megadeth album. Especially from my favorite eras of the band. I'm not as big on the 90s stuff. I know, people love what's the countdown. Um, but it was never like one of my favorites. I always liked the heavier stuff, the more thrashy stuff. So, and I love the modern era of the band as well as the early stuff. So, Vic is a big part of that as far as like the visual representation of the band, and I'm glad they've made Funko Pops for both of those. I don't know why we're touting Funko Pop so much, but like they don't sell a lot of other merchandise outside of that, like T-shirts and stuff that have some of these mascots on it. So they are cool to have.
Yeah, no, Funko Pops are cool. I collect almost strictly the music ones, mostly metal ish.
Yeah, most of mine are
You know,
metal. The other I've gotten gifts of other ones, like maybe some video game stuff.
I
A
mean, they have
friend
the
of mine,
Huns.
a friend of mine gave me the characters from Frasier, so I have those. But yeah, yeah, mostly metal stuff.
I mean, I have Han Solo, and I have, um, what's his name oh, from Tombstone. Um,
Doc Holliday.
Doc Holliday. Yes, man, I'm having a total brain fart night tonight. um, so yeah, we were talking about Funko Pops because they got some cool stuff. So,
Yeah,
so some of the
we'd be
others,
happy for Funko Pop to sponsor us.
and that would be pretty cool. So some of the other ones we kind of taught mentioned briefly, kind of skimmed over. You mentioned Not Man, I think earlier, didn't you?
Yeah.
So Not Man was really cool. Like I thought that Not Man from Anthrax was going to be something that kind of became that mascot kind of person, but he's never appeared on an album. And it became one of those things where he was on merch more than he was on albums. So it ended up not being as popular as it could have been. Um, there's others like Knucklehead from Five Finger Death Punch, and then that guy's adorned all their albums, and that's a pretty cool looking character. And it's most of that stuff is drawn in the way of comic books, so there's a pretty there's a connection with fans through that kind of style of artwork.
Hmm.
Um, I know you're not a big fan of Five Finger Death Punch, but I'm pretty sure you've seen the covers.
Yeah, I've seen the character. I mean, who isn't drawn to a like skull warrior, skull lord? You know, like they're just like they're cool characters. So
Right.
I'm good with that.
The one I never really got into was the jack o' lantern from Halloween. It's one of those where it's like they used a guy with a pumpkin on his head. I'm
It's
surprised.
kind of like the headless horseman or something like that.
Right.
For me, I thought it was cool. And it never bothered me. It didn't stand out as much as some of the others. But there's a couple album covers from Halloween that have the what is the character's name? Jack.
Yeah, Jack O' Lantern.
Um. Oh well, that makes sense. A couple of the covers are really cool. So that one did like yeah, it doesn't stand out as much as others, but it's still like recognizable to me. One that for me that's recognizable is the guy from Disturbed. Um, some of them have some similar traits to uh other mascots, but the guy I think is pretty recognizable. It always kind of threw me off because it looks heavier than Disturbed to me, but it's synonymous with the band at this point. So,
It's funny you say that, but we're going to talk about a particular character that my wife says the same thing about in a few minutes.
mm.
Um, but yeah, I agree. I like the guy from Disturbed. I think that's a pretty cool character. Yes, it implies something that's a lot heavier than the music uh, ends up being. But yet, again, they consider themselves a metal band. A lot of
Mhm.
these alternative metal bands, just because it's different, or alternative, they still feel that they're metal. They're playing to the style that is
No, I mean they are
prevalent
metal. I
today.
mean,
Yeah,
it's not like death metal, but it's metal.
right.
Um,
It's metal.
I always thought. So, have you seen the cover for? I mean, I know you have, but the cover for Disturbed 10,000 Fists.
Yes.
So there's two people on the cover that one guy looks like Tony Iommi. I don't know if it's supposed to be him or not. And then there's a girl next to the guy that looks like Death from the comic book, the Neil
Oh yeah,
Gaiman
yeah.
character.
Death, the high cost of living.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. Yes, it definitely looks like Tony Iommi. Either
And
that or
then
an angry New York butcher.
And then the on the other side, there was a skit on Saturday Night Live called the Hurley Boy. It looks like um, Chris Farley as the character from that skit.
There was something the other day that I saw that it wasn't Chris Farley, but it might as well have been. I can't remember because I know I saw Chris Farley doing like he does a really good like they did that imitation uh with all the rock the USA for Africa
Mm-hmm.
um thing where they did We Are the World, so they did a spoof on that on Saturday Night Live years and years and years ago, obviously, talking about Chris Farley, and it was such a funny skit because of the lines that they gave him, and each one was, each actor on the show was a different musician. It was freaking hilarious, and I forgot who the real musician was on that show that day. He was on that skit too. It was pretty funny, but um, Chris Farley played Meatloaf, and I'm like, he looks exactly like Meatloaf.
Yeah, I could see that.
So yeah, I like the guy. Now, one that's really not famous that doesn't really get a lot of I guess press when you want to look at it that way. But I always thought had they continued, it probably would have been really cool. But then it would have probably been canceled in today's world. Is Sergeant D from SOD from Stormtroopers of Death?
I always thought he was like really cool looking.
He is very cool looking, but like I said, he probably would have been canceled in today's society because he's relatively offensive. The whole album is extremely
Well,
offensive.
the album's offensive. I don't know if like
No,
just
not
seeing
no, not
the
visually
character.
him.
Yeah,
No, visually him is not offensive, but it would probably fit a lot of shit that's going on in today's world.
fair enough. Yeah.
But yeah, it was very cool. Um, and one that I don't think is really a mascot so much as more of a symbol um is Black Sabbath's Henry the Fallen Angel.
Agreed. I never
Like,
really thought of it as a character, but I guess it is.
I mean, it's a character, and it's funny because they used it not specifically, they used it a lot during the Ronnie James Dio years.
Mm-hmm.
And like when they re-released when they released the box set of the Dio years, they used that logo. But I do know for a fact that logo was used if I'm not mistaken. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but when Black Sabbath played with Ozzy in the later years, more recent times, and so it's an interesting thing because like I said, it says it first appeared.
It was Technical Ecstasy when it first appeared,
It, it
and
says the Never Say
Technical
Die tour.
Ecstasy's, huh?
It says the Never Say Die tour on the thing I'm reading.
It was on the tour shirts for Technical Ecstasy, which was before that, and that because that was 1976, and that's one of their worst albums. So it's like for me, I'm a big fan of their first 6 albums. I love that era of the band. So when I think of Ozzy's era of the band, I really don't think of that character whatsoever. And I never really thought of it as a mascot per se, as much as it was just a symbol, a logo. So yeah, like when I think of character, I think of like we've mentioned, like Vic Rattlehead, where there is a like they're interacting in some way. And so like even though the Jester head started off as more of a logo, it eventually became the character because like there was like I think it was what's the album I'm not a big fan of, Reroute to Remain, like
Mhm.
it's using like the Jester head is like a person, and actually it's on several people. And then albums that followed, like the Jester head was alive, in some form or fashion. Maybe like a mask, but still like a person. Face Bones to me, I mean, it's a character. It literally talks to the crowd. So like that to me is a character, whereas Henry nobody dressed up as Henry and like came out on the stage show or anything like that. So it was just more of a symbol to me.
Right. And oddly enough, Heaven and Hell, the version, the Ronnie James Dio version of Black Sabbath, the band Heaven and Hell, when because they couldn't use the name Black Sabbath, they actually used this logo on the Heaven and Hell album. So,
Mhm.
so we know that Sharon has nothing to do with that logo, and as
Yep.
by the fact that he was able, Tony was able to use it on the Heaven and Hell album. So, and Heaven and Hell band album, it's so weird. The Devil You Know, that album by Heaven and Hell. So, um, we're down to the last one. So one band that we haven't mentioned, their mascot, and they don't have this on albums so much as they have it on merch. Metallica, they have the Scary Guy, and over the years, the Scary Guy has evolved from a literally a stick figure sketch to, in many cases, a three-dimensional evil, almost like a bat kind of thing, but it's not. It's just a skull with a mohawk that James created, and he's used it in various different types of incarnations over the years. And I always thought it was pretty cool. I have several different shirts with the Scary Guy on it. There was I have an orange one. I wish I could use it, but it's stained, and I'm so upset that it got stained.
Mm,
Um, but
that's a
it
bummer.
has it's a version of the Scary Guy that is a stick figure, but it's got like it's almost sketch drawn. It's
Mm.
hard to really describe because it's unavailable to purchase now. So yeah, I don't even know if anybody has it out there. Um,
Maybe eBay.
maybe eBay, probably. But they've done different incarnations with it over the years, and they use it in the live setting, sometimes on the screens. But it's one that's more merch, and they use it a lot, like they did on the fan cans when they sold those to the fan club. So that's one I couldn't put him in my big four because it's just not better than some of the ones that I already mentioned. So, is there anyone you want to mention before we get to number one?
Yeah, I had one more I wanted to mention. I was a big fan of Violent Mind from Creator. Um, two albums that I think of when I think of that band, obviously Coma of Souls and Violent Revolution. They kind of mark important periods of the band for me. Um, where on the cover of Coma of Souls, you see the character have like literal open head, like a wound in the head that's been opened, and you see all these things going on inside. Um, and it was kind of the end of an era where they started changing their styles and doing some kind of more experimental stuff, and it wasn't. That's where I kind of dropped off the band. But when they came back, they brought back the character once more, and had that wound patched up, and it was kind of like representative of like we're back and in a triumphant return kind of way where the album cover was a direct reference to where they left off before. And then ever since then he's been around, and so I've always liked that one a lot. To me, it's not as quite as cool as some of the other ones we've mentioned, so I didn't have it in the big four, but it was just one that I've always been a fan of.
Cool, very cool, very cool. And just to kind of go over a few real quick in terms of names, there's the man with the iron mask from Quiet Riot. There's Christar from Danzig and Samhain. However you say the damn fucking name.
Saw Wayne.
Set Abominate from Iced Earth, Korgull from Voivod, um, and then there's Naren Hines from Sodom, and then you mentioned Violent Mind from Creator.
So there's one thing I don't understand about the Crystar for Danzig is that was a Marvel comic book, and I just don't understand like did he license the art or rip it off or what? Like, but it's never been like removed. Like, there's no censored version of it where it's been taken down. And I've kind of looked it up, but I've never really seen why. And maybe I just need to go back and do some more research. But like, it's weird to me that something that was on the cover of a comic book from a specific artist, is using that like on the album cover and there's no repercussions for it. So it's got to be a reason.
I mean, I'm looking up Chris Starr. Oh, I see what you're saying. Because it didn't show up until really late in this description of Chris Starr, the Marvel comic. I see
Mhm.
where it is. It says the weird history of Chris Starr, and it has that logo kind of in the background.
It's exactly that. Like I've just always been curious about, um, you know, why that's allowed. Because a company that's like like Marvel, who tends to sue people for everything. It just seems odd. I wonder if it's licensed out or if it belongs to the original creator and he allowed it, Danzig to use it, or I just don't know. I'm curious. If anybody knows, I would love to hear the story.
And it's only appeared on his album covers twice,
Mm-hmm.
but still, um, it is it's been on. It was on. I'm just gonna say Sam Hain. Fuck it. Their November Coming Fire album, and then it was on Danzig's first album. That's the only time. Well, that's not true because I thought in Thrall Demon Sweat, didn't he use that?
It's been on a few things, yeah, and even in like the shows, it was on the big like banner and everything too. So
Right.
I don't know. I'm just curious what the story is, to be honest.
It that is an interesting story when you say now that you bring it up because I thought I had seen it somewhere before, and
Uh huh.
knowing that now, I had probably seen that connotation over the years somewhere, saying, "Oh, it's the same as this." But yes, there's a three-dimensional version that's on Thrall Demon Sweat Live that's kind of sideways, but it's not the exact replica of Crystar the way it is on the comic book cover or the first album cover.
Yeah, it was drawn by Michael Golden, who is one of my favorite comic book artists. As far as like, I have a collection of his Batman covers, and he did a few comic or Batman comics in the '70s, and I've got pretty much every single one of them. So um, it's interesting. I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, totally. I'd be just as curious myself. But anyway, and last but not least, before we get to the finale, Murray from Dio is adorned all of Dio's albums, or most of them at least. That's one character I thought that would be pretty cool to see in a three-dimensional kind of, you know, animated kind of version. And there may
Hmm.
have been something that he's done over the years, but Dio slipped off my radar a long time ago. And when the band just wasn't cutting it for me. So, all right. We're here to number one, and my number one, I'm gonna assume is close to your number one. You can say yes or no, but it's Eddie from Iron Maiden. Is
Yeah,
Eddie
mine's Eddie from Iron Maiden
okay?
as well.
So, so we're gonna talk about Eddie.
Big surprise.
He has adorned every single Iron Maiden album except for two, and both of those are live albums. Um, so every studio album he has adorned. It is wild how iconic Eddie is. You sent me a text the other day of a reel of someone or an Instagram reel where someone was putting on the makeup and turning themselves into Eddie. Um, I'm I don't want to say that I'm pretty sure the person didn't listen to Iron Maiden, but hey, they probably did. We don't know.
Who knows? I mean,
Eddie's
they were a horror fan for sure because they
yeah,
were dressing up as all these different, or you doing makeup to look like all these horror characters. But
right.
they did Vic Rattlehead and Eddie. So
Eddie is iconic. Eddie is someone that transcends the album covers. Was as an Iron Maiden fan, you know, when you go to the concert, and I say we because you and I we went to the one, during the Legacy of the Beast tour. You have all the backdrops that have a different version of Eddie. There's Eddie artwork everywhere. For
Mhm.
the first 10 years of their existence, Eddie was drawn by Derek Riggs. And then after that, it started being drawn by other artists. And Derek, I think, kind of fell out of favor with the band and stuff like that. But he's still allowed to draw Eddie because guess what? That's his design, it's his creation.
Well, he was partial artist on Brave New World.
Yeah, I think that's like that was the last thing that he did with them. Um, but and when I say he fell out of favor, I mean I don't know how long ago it was. I don't think he fell out of favor with them after 10 years, so much as they decided to expand the universe of Eddie's. But I think he at some point just fell out of favor with the band and haven't used them since. But and they have like a regular artist, like Derek was back then, who they use for their album covers now. Um, I mean, Eddie, the creation that Derek Riggs made is just amazing, and it, you know, you see that the Killer's album cover, and the first thing you think of is Iron Maiden, and you think of Eddie, and that's it. What's your take on Eddie?
I mean, to me, he's definitely the most iconic mascot from any band. Um, and I do mean that, any band. Um, you know, what I love about Eddie is there is lore and continuity to the character. Like, he has all these different variations, and not just like from album to album, but also on the singles. Like, you think of um, the Trooper. There's a very iconic version of the Trooper Eddie. Every album has a different version. Like, the original one was, the more horror oriented one, where that you get to the second album, Killers, and he looks like a psycho killer, and then you get to Number of the Beast, and he's, summoning a demon basically, and then you get to the next one. Um, he's in a straitjacket and has been lobotomized. Then you get to the next album, and he's been his head's been re are closed up, but he's got like that little metal piece holding everything together, and that carries over in each album. He becomes a cyborg by the time you get to Somewhere in Time, but then uh, all of the cybernetics have been removed when you get to Seventh Son of Seventh Son. So there's also things that are representative of what they were doing musically. That he's a cyborg, and there's synths and Somewhere in Time, whereas most of that's been removed by the time you get to Seventh Son, and so therefore it's been removed from Eddie. Like, there's so much nuance to the character, and they've done things where they made a video game with him. Like, there's even the current cell phone game where you have different variations of Eddie that you can unlock and stuff like that. Like, he is super iconic. You and I both met Derek Riggs before the show. We got signed copies of different versions of the character, like these portraits of Eddie, that like some of our favorite versions of the character. He sells different prints of art he's done, and it's like, for me, we talked about Funko Pops. Let's talk about them again. Like, you and I both have pretty much the full collection of Funko Pops from Iron Maiden. I don't remember if you have the variant for the
I
Stranger in a Strange Land,
I
but
don't have Chase. No.
yeah, like, I even went out of my way to get the Chase version of that one, like, because we just love the character so much. You know, um, he is super interesting, super iconic, and like I said, there's like lore to the character. There's more depth than any other mascot from a band.
No, you're absolutely right. And talking about how they they carry on the little things from each one. That whole little rivet that keeps his head together. is still used to this day. And they put it in Book of Souls, but instead of a rivet, or a piece of metal with two screws in it, it was like a piece of, uh, for lack of a better sense about it, like a piece of bamboo stuck to his forehead that's holding his head together. It is just crazy how they have been able to continue that lore over the years. I mean,
Hmm.
when you think about the first appearance of Eddie was on the Running Free single. You didn't see his face. You know, who's who would have thought that 40 something years later he would still be around? He'd still be, bigger than ever, iconic, into the pop culture, put it that way. And that's just incredible to think about.
Yeah, like people that don't even know Iron Maiden recognize Eddie
Yeah.
because he's kind of a horror icon even.
Yes, in that sense too. So, what I was going to say before, my wife, so like much like you said that the guy from Disturbed makes it seem like it's heavier music.
Mhm.
My wife has always disagreed with the whole premise of Eddie. She says Eddie is makes Iron Maiden. You would expect something more heavier than what Iron Maiden is.
See, I disagree solely on the fact that Eddie reminds me of like a slightly more modern version of like the Universal monsters, like Frankenstein and Wolfman and that kind of stuff. He
Right.
always kind of fits to me in like maybe the Hammer era of those kind of films. And because if you listen to especially the early years, the lyrics are kind of cheesy, horror themed, and those kind of things, and that to me fits Eddie perfectly. So I get it, maybe from an outsider perspective, yeah, but when
Oh,
you
she's a
listen,
complete outsider. Complete outsider.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
She
But
can't
like
stand
when
Iron Maiden.
yeah, but when you look at the character and you listen to the music, you can understand.
Oh no, I mean, as a fan, you totally get it, right? And you as a fan of Iron Maiden, you crave seeing him when you go to the shows.
Hmm.
You're going to get a three-dimensional blow up in most cases. You're going to get the one that walks up on stage and has a fight with Bruce Dickinson every concert. I
Yep.
mean, my first show was the Power Slave tour, and so yeah, you in the background you get the different backgrounds, and they didn't have a shit ton of album covers back then, but they had a few, obviously. I mean, I believe Power Slave is now it was the fifth album, and it had several singles, but they they didn't have the backdrops like they do now back then, but they did things similar to that. But for Power Slave, you know, they have the head in the background, the tomb Eddie, right? And it splits in half. Spoiler alert if you're not, 50 years old. Uh, it splits in half, and out comes an inflatable Eddie that looks really cool. Arms are stretched across the stage. It's so it's so cool to see that.
Hmm.
Then you get Mummy Eddie who comes out and he's fighting with the band on stage. I mean, it's just wild shit. And they did it every tour and they did it every year. And that's something you began to expect that. And if they didn't do something like that, it was a disappointment, you know? And so, of course, they've had to keep it over the years. They don't do everything exactly the same because I don't think for our show they had an inflatable Eddie at the end. I don't remember.
They had they had the Demon Eddie when they did Iron
Oh,
Maiden.
that's right. So you see, they did have it. So
Mhm.
they've had an inflatable, and they have the live one that comes out. Then they have the backdrops.
Yeah, they had the
I mean,
one that was dressed as the Trooper.
right, exactly. And in for Book of Souls, they had them look like the Book of Souls cover, the Mayan mummy. And I say mummy because it's a mummified thing. It's just a bunch of skin and bones. Um, they've had Final Frontier Eddie, they've had all sorts of different Eddies. Now the Senjutsu Eddie, can't wait to see Senjutsu Eddie on stage. That's
Yeah,
gonna be so
that
cool.
would be really cool. Yeah.
So, I mean, there's nothing more iconic than Eddie out there. So, you have anything else you want to add?
I mean, not in regard to the mascots. I mean, I think we've covered them all. I think Eddie, to me, like I said, it's kind of the penultimate, so it's really hard to top or say anything further.
So I'm surprised you didn't mention Roy.
Um, Roy is cool, but at the same time, I always thought looked very kind of cheap and cheesy. If you're not familiar, Roy is the Reaper that's on the cover of the Children of Autumn albums. I mean, I think he's iconic in a way. Um, it worked for the band. I mean, I love the album covers, especially the early ones that were all kind of like a monotone color. Um, but yeah, like he's certainly not as cool as the ones we've talked about.
Totally understand. I mean, I thought he was pretty cool. I mean, I like that the symbolism is what works for that. So
Yeah, he's a Reaper. It looks like they dressed up one of their friends in a Reaper costume, and it's cool. I like it.
all right, well, guys, that is the end of this episode of Debating Metal. So remember, you can listen to us just about every week on your favorite podcast platform. And if you guys want to see us grow, which I hope you do, don't forget to click like or subscribe, and also tell all your friends about us so they can also like and subscribe to us as well.
And don't forget you can interact with us on Facebook, Instagram, and our new X account, or send us an email to debatingmetal@gmail.com. YouTube viewers, click subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when we post a new show. And remember, tune in to the next episode where we'll spark up another exciting metal debate. On behalf of Kenneth and myself, stay safe and always turn it up to 11.
See ya.